Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to do something a bit different. Some of you may not know, but I'm actually the author of two memoirs, and they're traditionally published. They are Downhill From Here and Running the Orient. And I thought I would impart some of my wisdom and understanding, such as it is, of how I went around publishing these books, why I think they succeeded in attracting the attention of publishers, and both of them have been on the Amazon bestseller list in their categories under running and jogging or athletics. And so yeah, I'm going to do two videos, one per book, and I'm going to tell you some key things about how I got those particular books published and what can be learned from that. So this first one I'm going to concentrate on, Downhill From Here, which came out in 2017, and yeah, that's right. It tells the story of my run from John O'Groats to Land's End in 2015, which was a journey of 1,174 miles. Took 48 days, I think, and I didn't go the easiest route. I went via the Great Glen Way, the West Highland Way, the Pennine Way, various circuitous routes, canals, and then ended up on the rugged southwest coastal trail in Cornwall. So quite an adventure. A lot of dramatic things happened, and I decided I wanted to write a book about it. And my initial idea was to make a film, which still may eventually happen, but I ended up shooting 450 hours of material for this film, so that's probably why it hasn't emerged yet. I do hope to get that done by the end of this year. But anyway, while I was struggling with mountains of footage, I decided to write down my ideas in the form of a running memoir. I didn't really think of it as a memoir as such. I kind of just thought of it as a story of a particular slice of my experience of running this incredible journey. What I discovered from research was that no one had written a book about running from John O'Groats to Land's End, or at least not that I could find. People had run the distance. There was a well-established record. I think it was Andrew Rivett ran it in less than 9 days, I believe. But I couldn't find a single notable book that had been published on the subject. Now, in fact, that has changed since then. There's because slightly before I did my run, a chap called Sean Conway, that some of you may have heard of, was completing a 3-stage length of Britain triathlon, and he'd already swum incredibly from let me get this right, from Land's End to John O'Groats. He'd started by cycling from John O'Groats to Land's End, and now he was completing it by running from John O'Groats to Land's End, and he wrote this book. But it took a bit longer to finish his book, so it actually came out about a year after mine. She's probably sold better than mine, but and then a friend of mine, Chris Thrall, whom I actually met during my John O'Groats to Land's End run, that I'd first of all met at a 24-hour race that I'd taken part in training. He had a long-term ambition to run from John O'Groats to Land's End, and eventually he wrote this book, which came out this year. So just thought I'd be rather generous and plug other people's books on the subject. But anyway, the fact is, at the time I wrote Downhill From Here, there wasn't a book about that particular running adventure. And this brings me on to two things that might seem contradictory in a way. If you're going to write a memoir, in order for it to gain an audience that's beyond your immediate friends and family, it has to have a quality of universability. There has to be something in it that would appeal to a wider readership. I wrote about running long distances, and I wanted my book to appeal to people who don't do that. In fact, I wanted it to appeal to people who don't even run for fitness. Perhaps, they do other things, they go to the gym, they walk, but they're not keen runners. So I didn't want to write a painstaking analysis of running gaits or nutrition or anything like that with this book. Although there are bits of running lore in there, it's very much more of a travelogue undertaken on foot at running speed, and sometimes not quite at running speed. But yeah, so it's very important to me that it appealed to a wider audience. And key to this is that I'm not writing the story of my life per se. I don't have a fascinating life from beginning to end, and I'm not famous. I have a tiny amount of fame having written this book and short stories and directed a feature film in 2015 called Sparks and Embers. But you know, I'm not a household name by any means. Why would anyone see my name and want to buy the book? They wouldn't. What they see when they pick up Downhill From Here is running from John O'Groats to Land's End and a pair of running shoes and a nice image of scenery. So they think, well, that'll be a hell of a travelogue, because that's quite a distance to run, and I wonder how he did that. And there's also here a quote from Sean Conway, who very kindly provided a quote for the book when he was still working on his own, I believe. Anyway, you're not David Copperfield. You know, you don't need to tell the conditions of your birth, the weather. Start as late as possible into the particular adventure that you're telling. You should be telling a story that's finite and bound. You know, you're telling a story of a particular experience you've had or set of experiences you've had. It may not be the whole of your life. It may take, you know, the narrative might require you to go into sort of substantial personal history, but if you can time band it or focus it in some way on a particular adventure or a particular experience you had, a particular relationship perhaps, you've got a far better chance of making it feel very focused and feel very structured. So that was the most intense experience of my life at the time, and so in writing it, it was very easy for me to channel those powerful memories into a narrative. And also I had a very obvious narrative structure, and I wrote chronologically what happened, broadly speaking, with some flashbacks to training, and throughout the book I put little flashbacks to other times in my life when I was running and what that was like. But generally I had a chronological, you know, and geographical focus, John O'Groats to Land's End. So yes, I chose a unique topic that hadn't been covered elsewhere. And the other thing is you've got to have a unique viewpoint. Well, remember that you do have a unique viewpoint, I should clarify. You know, you are an individual. The way that you see the world and your take on it is different from anyone else's. So, you know, use the aspects of yourself that make you an interesting voice to tell that story. What I was saying in Downhill From Here is that I'm not a professional athlete. I haven't won any races. I think I won one race, but that was like a fun run when I was working in the NHS. But yeah, I'm not, as I was once hilariously described, an endurance athlete. You may disagree if you read this and think, well, how, you ran 26 miles a day for like a month and a half, and that's pretty unusual. But I actually believe that pretty much anyone who's remotely fit and has that level of determination can do that. So yeah, my viewpoint was an extraordinary journey undertaken by an ordinary runner. Another key aspect to writing a successful memoir is personal honesty. There's no point in being coy about things, so if there are aspects of your past life, your behavior, your mental health, struggles you've had in various aspects of your life, put those in the book if they are pertinent. Obviously, people want to feel they're empathizing with a character who is being honest about their circumstances and their background, and that's one of the real things that will draw them in and make them turn the pages, is the feeling that this person is just being so candid and so honest. And I don't really know any other way to write, to be honest. I don't see the point of self-aggrandizing. I don't see the point of, but nor do I see the point of downplaying achievements, and I'll go on to that in a bit. It's striking that balance between saying, yes, this was an incredible thing that I did, it involved this amount of grit and determination, but at the same time, anyone can have that. And this is another aspect to the universality, and I suppose it's partly what Chris also is talking about in his book and his popular YouTube channel, is that grit and determination and achievement are things that anyone can aspire to, and in fact people generally do at some point in their life, and just forging ahead. So the theme of the book is perseverance, I suppose, and triumph over odds, and those are universal themes that people can get behind. So as well as being personally honest and expressing a sense of purpose and a sense of adventure, perhaps, or a sense of struggle, or a sense of overcoming obstacles, those kind of universal themes. Remember that your book needs to have characters. Now, that might sound a strange thing to say when you're talking about non-fiction, but unless you're literally writing a book about being alone in a desert for 6 months, you're going to encounter other people along the way, and their stories are sometimes as engrossing, sometimes more engrossing than your own. So put as many of those moments into the book as you can. They're often funny, they're often touching, and they'll just add so much flavour. And again, even, well, in my second book, I'll go into it more in the companion video to this, but there's a third character in Running the Orient, which is actually Roxy, which is our camper van that we converted for that adventure. So it doesn't necessarily even need to be a person. I mean, suppose you think about the film Castaway. I don't know if that's based on a true story or not, but let's imagine it was based on a true story of a man who was, I think it was actually, anyway, whatever, it doesn't matter. Tom Hanks's character is stranded on a desert island. He needs someone to talk to. He's desperately lonely, so he sort of creates this character Wilson out of a basketball, which has the word Wilson written on it because that's the brand of basketball. And he talks to it, and obviously it helps the filmmakers that he's got someone to talk to, but it helps him crucially. And those interpersonal relationships are vital. Partly, they help you understand yourself. They help you understand why you're doing this. And they also help you understand that you aren't the whole story. There's more to it than just whatever was going on in your life. There's what's happening to the people around you in the episode that you're narrating. So it's keeping that balance, again, the balance between personal and interpersonal. And also sort of worldly, understanding the world that you're, the setting, the environment that you're talking about in the course of your story. There's all, you need to have layers of interest going on. So actually quite a lot of Downhill From Here, I'm talking about the landscape that I'm running through, my feelings about Britain, differences between towns and villages and cities and wilderness, how easy it is to suddenly find yourself cut off from communication, in the Highlands particularly, where you have no phone signal, and no way of obtaining maps if you haven't got one in your hand. So all of those things come to play. So don't get too solipsistic that you're writing about your own mental inner states and struggles, and you forget to talk about the wider context, the world that you're in, the family perhaps, the companions if you're doing a travel memoir, the people you meet, the nature, the history of the city that you're exploring, whatever it is that you're talking about. Get plenty of that in there. Another thing that you'll borrow from a novelistic technique is dramatic shape. Now that might be a little bit odd because life doesn't necessarily just fall into a neat 3-act structure, but you will still have to create some sort of structure out of the story you're telling. You'll need a setup, you'll need an introduction, not necessarily literally, but that can also be helpful. You'll need some background, enough for your readers to understand who you are and why you going on this particular journey or having this particular experience is something of interest to them. And then you'll need conflict. Now, probably part of the reason why you want to tell this tale is because there was something that you were overcoming, either inside yourself or an interpersonal thing or a mental health problem or a lack of purpose in life, and all sorts of different things that will be bringing up inner conflict. You may also be talking about a situation where you're actually in literal conflict with others, or the world that you find yourself in. Say if it's a survival story, the main conflict will be, how do I get through this? And I actually think there's aspects of all of those things in Downhill From Here. I've got the internal conflict of, I don't know what I'm doing in my life, and can I find purpose through running somehow? Then I've got interpersonal conflict with people either advising me to do things in a certain way or not do things in a certain way, or the poor support people that I put through hell during my journey, including my father, who was frightened for my life at one point. And then the conflict with the world. You know, at one point I was lost in the Highlands for 5.5 hours as the sun was coming down, and I was really in a state of distress and exhaustion. And I had to sort of ford a stream. And when I say ford a stream, I mean wade through a river up to my neck, and then eventually swim whilst holding my camera and my phone above my head. So yeah, all of those conflicts were built into the book. And a particular problem I faced in Downhill From Here was that last experience of nearly drowning happened on day 5. Now, I still had 43 days to recount. So I had to sort of keep bringing aspects of that experience back in, flavors and fears of it happening again. And even though, you know, the most life or death thing happened on day 5, I still had ongoing struggles that meant that I might not be able to finish the journey. And I built a sort of narrative of there's trauma in the past that I've created for myself, and I'm now trying to overcome it through the rest of the journey and not repeat it. But you'll find a shape. If you have a good introduction and setup, some conflict, some obstacles that you've overcome, and an ending, and this is a key thing, you know, don't just leave it to dribble out. End your story on a key moment of realization, on a moment of triumph, ideally, because that tends to be, you know, audiences love that stuff. You know, if you end on a downer, you know that's, you know, the audience can feel betrayed in a way if they've come with you on an adventure and a struggle, and it ends in a really downbeat, miserable conclusion. It's daring. It's a daring choice. Perhaps it's a valid choice, but I wouldn't necessarily suggest it's a good idea on your first book. Put it that way. Yeah, so you've given it dramatic shape. You've balanced, you know, between the personal, the interpersonal, and the worldly, say, or global, whatever it is. You've included all the characters. You've been honest. You've struck the right balance between self-aggrandizement and downplaying your, you know, achievements or struggles. There are certain techniques now that you can use that are also potentially borrowed from fiction. One technique I used quite a lot was flashbacks. So I would start a chapter with an extraordinary moment or a moment of struggle, and leave the audience to go, what on earth's going on here? How has this character come to this point? And then I'll flash back and say, you know, earlier that day. It can sound a little bit corny, but it does work. It works really well. I wouldn't overuse it, but now and again, especially where you need to launch into a moment of drama and you can't afford to wait till when it would occur in the chronology of the book, it's a good technique for that. Dialogue. This is one of the biggest notes I got from my editors, was that they wanted more dialogue, and I thought, but I don't remember. I don't have an eidetic memory. How am I going to remember conversations I had like a year and a half ago? Here's the thing. It's not vital that you remember every word. You will find that you can remember a lot more than you think you can, especially about how a person spoke and obviously what they said and the attitude they had saying it. And if you convey those 3 things accurately, you know, their particular way of speaking, the content of what they were saying, and the emotional resonance it had when they were saying it, that's enough verisimilitude. You're not a journalist trying to recount a quote. You are a person who is giving a flavor of a conversation. You know, you're giving the truth of the conversation without necessarily the exactly specific words in which those sentiments were expressed. So I found I recreated in some ways. I mean, because I'd filmed it, I did actually have moments that I had recorded, but you probably won't have that yourself. And lastly, sometimes you need a breather, like an interlude, like a little moment out of the main narrative. I get to that more in my second video, my second book. I did a bit more of that, but even in this one, I broke it into 3 sections. So basically the journey is segmented into 3 geographical sections, and then in the middle of the book there are photographs. I actually think this is a very important aspect of memoir, is to give people a real feeling of what's happening, to show people to show your readers what things actually look like is a great thing. It really helps the narrative to have some visual cues in there as well. And there are also maps. So each section is broken down into a more detailed map so that people can sort of place things and understand the context of what's going on without having to Google it. So all of these things add value. I toyed with the idea of doing an index, but that didn't really feel like the kind of book where that would be useful. I put appendices as well. Sorry, there's appendices in here. Little extra things that particularly the runners or the more sort of retentive travel enthusiasts might want. So in reverse order, the 4th appendix is 6 life lessons from the long run. The 3rd appendix is a list of all the kit that I used on my person. The 2nd appendix was a list of all the equipment that was in the support vehicle. And the first one was a very sweary song that I sang to myself in my darkest moments, which I sort of reconstructed just for a laugh, really. It only consists of one word, primarily. It begins with F. Various versions and variations of it. All of these things, add value to the reader. And so when they're picking up in the bookshop, assuming you have a physical book, you may not, but it certainly helps to have things that the reader will sort of be intrigued by, and illustrations, photographs, indexes, maps, all sorts of things like that, where they are appropriate. Don't over egg it, but they all help to draw the reader in and make them feel that you're giving them a product of value. Impart a little knowledge. Don't just make it all about you. Especially if it's a travel story or a historical story, you may want to reference other books, films, research that you've done. You may want to quote people that you've talked to. You may want to reference some sources. You may want to include little facts, even little box outs if you want to. I've seen some particularly running books that have almost like little tips or little facts about different aspects of the greater story world. If it's about running, there would be little facts about races or history of running, something like that. And a key thing to remember is, what is your readership taking away from this book? When they put it down, when they finish, when they turn the last page, what are they taking from it? And that might sound a bit of a strange thing, but you don't want your readers to just instantly forget the book the second they put it down. You want them to recommend it to others. You really want them to say, oh God, you've got to read this. It's really good. It's really interesting. So the takeaway is a key thing. And that, I suppose, is kind of linked to the theme of the book. Because when someone's trying to describe, so what's the book about? They're going to say 2 things, really. They're going to say the facts, like, it's a book about this guy who runs from John O'Groats to Land's End. To which their friend will reply, why am I interested in that? And then hopefully they'll say something like, well, it's really interesting because he's not like a super athlete. He's just an ordinary guy at a crossroads in his life, and he overcomes these obstacles and these incredible things happen to him. And it's, hopefully they say it's well written and descriptive and enjoyable. But the takeaway is, what did you get from reading it? How was your life improved in some small way by reading this book? So that's quite a key thing to think. You don't have to have an answer for that the moment you start writing, but by the time you finish writing your book, you should be quite clear about what you want your readers to take from the book. And that might be actually literally stated in some way in the conclusion or the final chapter or afterword or whatever you want to put it. Or it might just be implicit. It depends on your writing style and probably the genre. because there are genres within memoir. You could write something that's more of just a straight autobiography, very factual. If you happen to be a person of note, you're more likely to take that route. But if you're an ordinary person who had an extraordinary one-off experience, it may be the case that it doesn't make sense to do it that way, and you're really just going to sort of thematically seal off the book at the end. I'm rambling. Anyway, let me go back to my notes. All right, so you've written your book. You've maybe done a few drafts. You're not sure whether it's finished, but you're ready to show it to someone. This is the vital stage. You get some beta readers. Now, these can be friends, but they should be very honest friends who are good at talking about literature, really, are good at talking about what you've written. They should be able to be objective enough to look beyond it. Oh my God, it's amazing, my friend's written a book. They should be able to say, well, it flagged in the middle, or this chapter just went on, or you've repeated yourself, or I didn't really buy it when this happened, or, there are many criticisms that are valid. The main thing is they just need to be honest, and they need to be reliable enough that they will actually read it if you ask them to eventually. You can't make someone do you a huge favor like reading a book they don't really want to read, but make sure that they're honest. If they say, I don't really have time, or I'm not going to get to it for a while, then yeah, perhaps they're not the right choice. It's just not going to fit in with their life. The other key thing is editors. Now, I didn't use a paid editor for this book. I might do that in the future, but it can be quite pricey. You're probably going to part with between £500 and £1,000 for a good editor for a 300-page book. And that's a big investment. I'm sure it can be massively valuable, but what I did instead was I gave it to some friends, I took feedback from them, I did another revision, and then eventually I sent the opening chapters to 3 publishers. It's very unusual what happened with Downhill From Here, so I don't expect this to happen to everyone. I sent it to 3 publishers. 2 of them were interested, and I went, oh, okay, that's interesting. Now, with non-fiction, you can approach publishers without an agent. You're usually doing it on a combination of a pitch and opening chapters, and that's very much what I did with this. And I think because it was such an unusual story, and nobody'd done it before, and I picked the right publishers. I sent it, the 2 that came back with that were interested. One of them was a mass market publisher of, and it had published quite a few books about running. The other one was a smaller independent Scottish publisher that had published books more about travel, but on a wide range of topics. I was in the unfortunate but kind of nice position of choosing between 2 possible publishers, and I didn't really know which to go with. I still don't know if I made the right decision, but I will say that Sandstone produced a beautiful book. It's very, a lovely object with a wraparound cover, full colour photographs, really well produced. Yeah, nicely typeset, good choice of fonts, and all round great production. Would the other one have produced such a nice book? I don't know. Would they have sold it more assiduously? It's hard to say. One thing you'll have to bear in mind is that whether you have an agent or not, whether you choose a big publisher or a small one, you're going to be involved quite a lot in the production of your book, and you would be foolish to entirely give that process away. So I had quite a lot of input into the cover. In fact, the photograph on the cover I took, and the one on the back. Yeah, I took both of those photographs, but they've been highly processed by a very talented designer who's added these sort of graphic waves, and I wanted to get that right because I wanted the book to be accurately portrayed. You won't always have a huge say in this. I mean, if the book had been a massive success, it might have been translated into other languages, and then I wouldn't have any say on what their covers look like. They would be different publishers. But if you can have an input into that, make sure you see that through. That's actually quite, I find it fun, but maybe not everyone would. The cover quotes, yes. I got Steve Chilton, who was one of the authors on Sandstone's imprint, and Sean Conway, who I think I contacted just through Twitter because I'd read about him, and I knew he was an adventurer. Did I know he'd run from John O'Groats to Land's End? Yeah, I think I knew he'd done it, but anyway, those were the two people who provided quotes for the book, and that was very helpful, and that will be of great help if you can do it. Even if you're self-publishing, if you can get the book to some influencers or notable persons that are linked in some way to the theme, that will definitely help sell your book. Okay, I'm going to, in the second video where I'll go more into details about running the Orient, I'm going to talk about preparing a book pitch, because that's really how I sold the second one. But one thing that's going to be key once your book is produced is that you're going to have to be quite heavily involved in marketing and selling it to get it beyond the friends and family and whatever limited followers you have on social media. So be prepared to do things like podcasts and blogs and not blogs, that's ancient technology, podcasts and physical book tours if the world opens up enough for us to do that, but write articles, be interviewed for newspapers, whatever it is that the publisher wants, and whatever traction you can get yourself, take advantage of it, because it's really vital at the moment to get books out there in the world. Finally, just be happy you've written your memoir and that someone's published it, or that you've managed to self-publish it. Don't expect to get rich from it. It's not a good motivation to tell that story. You should just want to tell the story because you think it's an entertaining, informative, dramatic story that should be heard. And if you do that and you do it well, people will want to read it. Whether or not they find out about the existence of the book is another thing. But you'll get good reviews if you've followed the tips I've come up with here. You've been honest, you've told an interesting story, you've made it universal, etc., etc., etc. Hopefully you enjoyed the process of writing your book, and you feel a great sense of, you feel almost like you've given birth. I mean, I'm not a father, I hope to be still, but this is my baby, my first baby, and wave it at the camera one more time. This felt like I'd, had a child, and I felt very protective of it, and I felt very proud of it, and I was looking forward to it meeting the world, and that was the motivation for writing it. And if that's the motivation, I think you'll write a better book. And on that note, I shall leave you. I'm going to put some links on the screen so you know where to obtain the book, and if you want to watch some of my other videos, I've got some how-to videos about writing short stories, and I also have quite a lot of, well, I think 80 short stories that I've written and narrated on this very channel. Please subscribe and share this video if you have any friends who are writers who want some insight into how to do a memoir. And I will be back with a book, with a sequel on running the Orient very soon. So thanks for listening, and goodbye.